Every mother will do anything to protect her unborn child, even if it means running barefoot through a freezing forest in the dead of night. Sometimes the most dangerous place isn't where you're running to, it's what you're running from. On a cold October evening in Grey Hollow, Officer Daniel Martinez found Emily Baird collapsed under an oak tree, 8 months pregnant and shaking with terror. She had been hiding for 3 years, with the help of people who make women disappear when their lives depend on it. Emily had a secret about a powerful family, something so dangerous they wanted her dead before she could give birth. She thought she was safe in the safe house, but someone had found her. Now she was alone in the woods with nowhere left to run. What happened to Emily 5 years ago that made her go into hiding? And why did they want to silence her forever just days before her baby was due? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Officer Daniel Martinez had been patrolling the back roads of Grey Hollow for 15 years, and in all that time he'd never seen anything quite like this. The call had come in around 9:30 on a Tuesday night. Mrs. Henderson from Pine Ridge Road thought she heard someone crying in the woods behind her property. Daniel had expected to find a lost hiker, maybe a teenager who'd had too much to drink at one of the weekend parties that occasionally spilled over into the forest preserves surrounding their small mountain town. What he found instead was a young woman, heavily pregnant, curled beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree that had probably been standing when his grandfather first wore a badge in this county. She was conscious but trembling violently, her dark hair matted with rain and bits of leaves. Her feet were bare and bleeding, her clothes, what remained of them, were torn and muddy. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They held a terror so profound it seemed to reach right through him. "Mum?" Daniel approached slowly, his flashlight beam lowered to avoid startling her further. "I'm Officer Martinez, with the Grey Hollow Police Department. Are you hurt?" She flinched at his voice but didn't run. That told him something important. She was either too exhausted to flee, or she'd made a deliberate choice to trust him. In his experience, people who found themselves hiding in the woods at night rarely made that choice easily. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of rain pattering against the canopy overhead. "Please don't call it in yet." Daniel crouched down, maintaining his distance but close enough to see that she was shivering uncontrollably. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and he could see her breath misting in the cold mountain air. October. Nights in Grey Hollow could drop into the 40s, and she was soaked through. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Emily." The answer came after a long pause, as if she'd had to think about it. "Emily Baird." "Okay, Emily. I'm Daniel. Can you tell me how you got here?" Her hand moved instinctively to her swollen belly, and Daniel noticed she was clutching something, a torn piece of plastic that looked like it might have been a hospital bracelet. The motion was protective, maternal, and it told him everything he needed to know about her priorities. "I've been walking," she said, "since morning." Daniel did quick mental calculations. If she'd been walking since dawn, that meant she'd covered at least 20 miles through rough terrain in her condition, without shoes. The nearest road was 3 miles away. Whatever had driven her into these woods, it wasn't a simple domestic dispute or a moment of panic. "Emily, I need to get you warm and dry, and we need to have a doctor take a look at you and the baby. Can you stand?" She nodded, though the effort seemed to cost her. Daniel helped her to her feet, noting how she leaned heavily against him, but kept her eyes constantly scanning the darkness around them, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. His patrol car was equipped with emergency blankets and a first aid kit. But what Emily needed was proper medical attention and a warm, safe place to recover. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away in Millfield. But Dr. Sarah Chen ran a small clinic right here in Grey Hollow. More importantly, Sarah was someone Daniel trusted completely, As they made their way slowly through the woods toward his vehicle, Daniel's radio crackled to life. "Unit 7, what's your status on that Pine Ridge call?" Daniel hesitated for just a moment before responding. "Unit 7 to dispatch. False alarm on Pine Ridge Road. Probably just an animal. I'm going to finish my sweep and head back to the station." Emily looked up at him with something that might have been gratitude, though the wariness never left her expression. She'd asked him not to call it in, and his instincts told him there was a good reason for that request. The drive to Dr. Chen's clinic took 12 minutes, during which Emily sat wrapped in an emergency blanket, still shivering, but no longer on the verge of hypothermia. She didn't speak, but Daniel could see her in his peripheral vision, still constantly alert, still watching. Grey Hollow had always been the kind of place where people knew each other's business, sometimes whether they wanted to or not. It was a community of about 8,000 souls, nestled in a valley between two mountain ridges, close enough to the interstate that young people could commute to jobs in the city, far enough away that the pace of life remained deliberately slow. Daniel had grown up here, left for college and a stint in the military, then returned to take over his father's role in the police department. His father's badge, tarnished brass from the 1970s, still rode in his patrol car's glove compartment, a reminder of the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform in a place where your reputation was built over decades, one interaction at a time. Dr. Chen's clinic occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian house on Main Street, just 3 blocks from the town square where a bronze statue of some long-forgotten Civil War colonel stood eternal watch over the weekly farmers' market. Sarah had moved to Grey Hollow 5 years ago, fresh from her residency in trauma medicine, drawn by the promise of small-town practice and the opportunity to make a real difference. She'd quickly become one of the community's most trusted figures, known for her competence, her discretion, and her willingness to make house calls when circumstances required it. The clinic was dark when they arrived, but Daniel had called ahead from the car. Sarah met them at the back entrance, dressed in jeans and a sweater, her medical bag already in hand. "What do we have?" she asked, though her eyes had already taken in Emily's condition and made their own preliminary assessment. "This is Emily," Daniel said. "She's been walking through the woods since this morning, 8 months pregnant, hypothermic, possible dehydration." Sarah nodded and helped Emily inside, guiding her to one of the examination rooms where the lights were warm and bright. "Let's get you comfortable," she said to Emily. "First things first, we need to get your core temperature up and check on your baby." As Sarah worked, taking vital signs, listening to the fetal heartbeat, gently cleaning and bandaging Emily's torn feet, Daniel found himself studying the young woman who'd stumbled into his quiet Tuesday night and turned it upside down. She was probably 28 or 29, with intelligent dark eyes and the kind of bone structure that suggested she'd been quite beautiful before exhaustion and fear had carved hollows in her cheeks. Her hands, when she wasn't protecting her belly, moved with the unconscious precision of someone accustomed to careful, detailed work. A teacher, maybe, or a social worker. "The baby's fine," Sarah announced after completing her examination. "Heart rate is strong and steady. You're dehydrated and exhausted, but there's no sign of premature labor. You're very lucky, Emily." "Thank you," Emily whispered. It was the first time Daniel had heard genuine warmth in her voice. "Now," Sarah continued, settling into a chair beside the examination table, "can you tell us what happened? How did you end up walking barefoot through the mountains?" Emily's expression immediately shuttered. The brief moment of relaxation vanished, replaced by the same wary alertness she'd shown in the forest. "I got lost," she said simply. Daniel and Sarah exchanged glances. It was the kind of answer that raised more questions than it resolved. Polite, technically possible, but lacking any of the details that would make it believable. "Emily," Daniel said carefully, "in my experience, people don't usually get lost without shoes, especially not when they're 8 months pregnant. If someone hurt you, or if you're afraid of someone, we can help. "You can't," Emily replied, so quickly and with such certainty that it stopped any follow-up questions cold. "You can't help because you don't understand what you're dealing with." There was something in her voice, not just fear, but knowledge. This wasn't a woman who'd been overwhelmed by circumstances she didn't comprehend. This was someone who understood exactly what she was up against and who had made calculated decisions. "Based on that understanding, then help us understand," Sarah said gently. Emily stared at them both for a long moment, and Daniel could practically see her weighing options, calculating risks. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but resigned. "I've been hiding for 3 years, she said. "There are people who help women like me, women who need to disappear when their lives depend on it. I thought I was safe. I thought they couldn't find me, but yesterday morning someone did." The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring them to disbelieve her or to ask questions she clearly wasn't ready to answer. Daniel felt a familiar tension building in his chest. The same feeling he'd gotten on patrol in Afghanistan when intelligence suggested the quiet village ahead might not be as peaceful as it appeared. His 15 years in Grey Hollow had been deliberately uneventful. Petty theft, the occasional domestic dispute, teenagers drinking in the woods. The kind of small-town policing that let him sleep well at night and feel good about the work he was doing. But Emily Baird represented something different. Something that suggested the peace he'd found in Grey Hollow might be more fragile than he'd believed. "Who's looking for you, Emily?" he asked. She closed her eyes and leaned back against the examination table, one hand still resting protectively. "On her belly. People with enough power to make problems disappear," she said quietly. "People who've been making problems disappear for a very long time." The silence that followed Emily's words stretched for nearly a minute. Daniel watched her face, looking for tells, for the small signs that would indicate whether she was telling the truth or crafting a story. What he saw instead was exhaustion, so profound it seemed to weigh down her very bones, and beneath that, a kind of resigned determination that spoke of someone who had already accepted the worst possible outcomes. "Emily," Sarah said finally, "I need you to know that whatever you tell us stays in this room. Patient confidentiality isn't just a rule for me, it's sacred." Emily nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the torn hospital bracelet she still clutched in her left hand. It was faded and partially illegible, but Daniel could make out enough to see it was from St. Mary's Hospital in Portland, dated 3 years ago. "The place I was staying," Emily began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't like a shelter or anything you'd recognize. It was a house in the mountains, about 50 miles from here, Pine Ridge area. A woman named Maria ran it. Maria Santos. She coordinated everything." "Coordinated what?" Daniel asked. "The network. Women who need to disappear completely, who can't just go to a regular shelter or safe house because the people looking for them have too much reach, too many connections. Maria helped us become invisible." Emily shifted on the examination table, wincing slightly as her movement pulled at the bandages Sarah had wrapped around her feet. "I've been there for 3 years. Different houses, different identities, but always under Maria's protection. Client 47, that's all I was. No real name, no personal history, just a number in Maria's files." "What changed?" Sarah asked. "Why did—" "You have to run. Next Tuesday," Emily said. "I was supposed to testify in Portland about something that happened 5 years ago when I was in college." Her hand moved to her belly again. "Maria said it was safe, that they'd worked everything out with the prosecutor's office, that there were enough safeguards in place." Daniel felt the familiar tingle of recognition that came when pieces of a puzzle started clicking together. "What were you going to testify about?" Emily looked up at him then, and for the first time since he'd found her under the oak tree, she made direct eye contact. "A party, spring of my senior year at Portland State, a graduation celebration that turned into something else." The way she said it made Daniel's chest tighten. He'd heard that particular tone before, the careful flatness that victims used when they were trying to discuss trauma without drowning in it. There were photos, Emily continued, and other evidence, DNA evidence. She paused, swallowing hard. The baby I'm carrying, the timing matches what happened that night. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her medical training automatically cataloguing implications. Emily, have you had prenatal genetic testing done? Maria arranged everything through private doctors. Off the books, paid for in cash. The DNA results are part of what I was going to present in court next week. Daniel was beginning to understand the scope of what Emily was describing, and it made his stomach turn. This wasn't just about assault. It was about evidence that could put someone away for decades. Evidence that included a living child who would grow up as proof of what had been done to her mother. Who was at this party? He asked, though he was starting to suspect he might not like the answer. Emily reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a torn photograph. Half of it was missing, ripped away so that only 3 figures remained visible. Emily, herself, looking young and happy and completely unaware of what was about to happen to her. And 2 other people whose faces made Daniel's blood run cold. Judge Robert Whitmore's son, Emily said quietly, Bradley Whitmore, and his friends from law school. Daniel stared at the photograph, his mind reeling. Judge Whitmore had been on the bench in Gray Hollow County for 30 years. He'd officiated at Daniel's sister's wedding. He'd been the one to recommend Daniel for his promotion to senior patrol officer. The Whitmore family owned half the commercial real estate in Gray Hollow, funded the annual scholarship program at the high school, and had their name on the children's wing of the hospital. That's impossible, Daniel said, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. Powerful families had been covering up their children's crimes for as long as there had been powerful families. I know how it sounds, Emily said. I know what the Whitmores represent in this community, but I also know what happened to me in that hotel room, and I know why Maria's network exists, and I know why I've spent 3 years living under an assumed name. She pulled the torn photograph back and held it against her chest. Yesterday morning, Maria woke me up before dawn. She said someone had found us, that there were vehicles coming up the mountain road. She gave me this. Emily held up an old cell phone and told me to run north through the forest until I found help. Where's Maria now? Sarah asked. I don't know. She stayed behind to buy me time. She said she'd try to contact me on this phone when it was safe. Emily stared down at the device. It's been dead since yesterday afternoon. Daniel took the phone and examined it. It was an older model, the kind designed for secure communications, but the battery was completely drained and the screen showed signs of water damage. Emily, I need you to understand something, Daniel said carefully. If what you're telling us is true, if the Whitmore family is involved in this, then we're dealing with people who have connections throughout the state legal system. Judge Whitmore has influence that reaches into the prosecutor's office, the state police, probably the FBI field office in Portland. I know, Emily said simply. That's why Maria's network exists. That's why I've been hiding for 3 years. Instead of just calling the police, the weight of what she was saying settled over Daniel like a heavy coat. If Emily was telling the truth, and everything in his gut told him she was, then the safe, predictable world of Gray Hollow that he'd spent 15 years protecting was built on a foundation of lies and covered-up crimes. What do you need from us? Sarah asked. The question surprised Daniel, but he realized it was exactly the right thing to ask. I need to stay hidden until I can figure out how to contact the prosecutor's office safely, Emily said. Maria had protocols for this. Backup. Plans. But I don't remember all of them. I was supposed to memorize emergency contacts, safe phone numbers, but when those men came yesterday morning, I just ran. Men, Daniel leaned forward. How many men? 3 vehicles. Black SUVs with tinted windows. They came up the private road that led to our house like they knew exactly where they were going. Emily's voice grew smaller. Maria made me leave through the back door while she went to meet them. I heard her talking to someone, heard a man's voice, but I was already in the tree line. Daniel and Sarah exchanged glances. This was no longer just about helping a traumatized pregnant woman. This was about a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of their community's power structure. "Emily," Daniel said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the absolute truth. Is there any evidence, documents, recordings, photographs that proves what you're saying about Bradley Whitmore?" Emily nodded. "Everything. Photos, medical reports, recorded statements. Maria kept copies of everything in multiple locations. She said it was the only way to stay safe, make sure the evidence would surface even if something happened to us." "Where?" "I don't know all the locations, but I know one." Emily looked directly at Daniel. "Safety deposit box at First National Bank, right here in Grey Hollow, box 247. Maria gave me the key 3 months ago, said it was insurance." Daniel felt the world shift beneath his feet. For 15 years, he'd believed he was protecting a community where the worst crimes were drunk driving and domestic disputes that could be resolved with counseling and cooling off periods. Now he was looking at evidence that one of the most respected families in Grey Hollow had been covering up sexual assault for years, and that their attempts to silence victims had driven those women into an underground network that sounded like something out of a thriller novel. "The key," he said. "Do you still have it?" Emily reached down and pulled off her left shoe, or what remained of it after her barefoot journey through the forest. Taped to the inside of the sole was a small brass key. "Maria said never to let it out of my sight," Emily said, holding it up. "She said if anything ever happened to the network, this key was the only thing standing between the truth and a cover-up that would let them keep hurting people." Daniel stared at the key, understanding that he was looking at a piece of evidence that could destroy some of the most powerful people in his community, and that might be the only thing standing between Emily and the people who wanted her dead. The key lay on Sarah's desk like an accusation, its brass surface catching the overhead lights of the clinic examination room. Daniel found himself staring at it, trying to process the implications of what Emily had just revealed. In his 15 years as a police officer, he'd investigated crimes that ranged from petty theft to manslaughter, but he'd never encountered anything that felt as dangerous as this small piece of metal. "Tell me about Maria's network," he said, quietly. "How long has it been operating?" Emily pulled the emergency blanket tighter around her shoulders, though the room was warm. "I don't know exactly. Maria never talked about when it started, just that she'd been helping women disappear. For as long as she could remember, she called it the Underground Railroad, said it was the same principle, just different cargo." "How did you find them?" Sarah asked. "I didn't. They found me." Emily's voice grew even quieter. 3 years ago, I was living in Portland, working as a social worker for the state. I'd taken the Whitmore family's money and signed their non-disclosure agreement, but I couldn't live with myself. I was having nightmares, panic attacks. I'd started drinking too much, missing work. Daniel had seen it before, the way trauma could eat away at someone from the inside, even when they thought they'd found a way to cope with it. "I finally went to see a therapist," Emily continued. "Dr. Rebecca Martinez. No relation," she added, glancing at Daniel. "I told her everything. About the party, about what Bradley and his friends did to me, about the photos they took, about how the Whitmores had paid me to keep quiet." "What did she do?" She listened, and then she made a phone call. Emily's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. 2 days later, Maria showed up at my apartment. She said Dr. Martinez was part of a network of people who helped women in situations like mine. Women whose attackers had too much power for the regular justice system to handle. Sarah leaned forward. "How many women are we talking about?" I never knew exact numbers. Maria was careful about operational security, but from what I could piece together over 3 years, at least 30 women, maybe more, all with stories similar to mine, all involving men whose families had enough money and influence to make problems disappear. Daniel felt a sick recognition building in his chest. All involving the Whitmore family? Not all of them, but a lot of them. Bradley Whitmore has been doing this for years, and his father has been covering it up. Maria showed me newspaper clippings, in court records that got sealed, settlements that were paid out quietly. Emily's voice hardened. I wasn't his first victim. I probably won't be his last unless someone stops him. The implications were staggering. Daniel thought about all the times he'd interacted with Judge Whitmore over the years, community events, official ceremonies, the occasional legal proceeding where the judge had seemed like the embodiment of small-town justice and moral authority. The evidence in the safety deposit box, Daniel said. What exactly are we talking about? Everything Maria collected over the years. Photographs from multiple incidents, medical reports that were buried, DNA evidence, recorded statements from women who were too afraid to go public. She said it was enough to put Bradley away for decades and to prove that Judge Whitmore knew what his son was doing and helped cover it up. Emily shifted on the examination table, wincing as the movement sent a sharp pain through her lower back. Sarah immediately moved to check on her, taking her pulse and listening to the baby's heartbeat. With a portable monitor. The contractions are starting, Sarah said quietly. They're very mild right now, but we need to be prepared. This baby could come any time in the next 2 weeks. The reality of Emily's situation hit Daniel like a physical blow. She wasn't just a witness hiding from powerful enemies. She was a pregnant woman, about to give birth, carrying a child whose very existence was evidence of the crime she was prepared to testify about. Emily, what was your plan? I mean, before you had to run from the safe house. Maria had arranged everything. I was supposed to give birth at a private clinic in Canada with doctors who wouldn't ask questions about paperwork. After the baby was born, I would give her up for adoption to a family Maria had vetted, people who would keep her safe, who would never know about her biological father or what he'd done. Emily's voice broke slightly. Then I would come back to testify with the DNA evidence that proved Bradley Whitmore assaulted me. But now I don't know. The adoption was supposed to protect her from retaliation. The Whitmores can't hurt what they can't find. But if I'm exposed, if they know who I am and where I am, then she's not safe anywhere. Daniel found himself thinking about his own family. His sister, who lived in Portland with her husband and 2 young children. His elderly mother, who still attended the same church where Judge Whitmore served on the board of trustees. The idea that such a fundamental corruption could exist right under his nose, hidden behind a facade of respectability and community service, made him question everything he thought he knew about the place he'd spent his life protecting. There's something else, Emily said, her voice barely audible. Something Maria discovered just before I had to run. What? Emily reached into her jacket and pulled out a small recording device, an old-fashioned mini-cassette recorder that looked like it belonged in the 1990s. 3 days ago, Maria managed to get a recording of Judge Whitmore talking to someone on the phone, someone who was updating him on the search for network safe houses. Daniel's blood went cold. Someone inside law enforcement? I don't know. The recording is only about 2 minutes long, but it's clear that Judge Whitmore knows about the network, knows that women have been hidden in safe houses, and knows that there's evidence that could destroy his family. Sarah, who had been quietly checking Emily's vital signs, looked up sharply. Does this recording mention specific locations, specific people? It mentions Pine Ridge. It mentions Maria by name. Emily's voice grew smaller. And it mentions Gray Hollow. Judge Whitmore told whoever he was talking to that if any of the network women showed up in Gray Hollow, they needed to be dealt with immediately. The room fell silent, except for the quiet hum of Sarah's medical equipment. Daniel felt the weight of his badge, the responsibility that came with the oath he'd taken 15 years ago to protect and serve the people of his community. But what did that oath mean when the people he was supposed to protect included both the victims of terrible crimes and the powerful families who had committed those crimes? Emily, he said finally, I need you to understand something. What you're describing, if it's true, it means that some of the most trusted institutions in this county are compromised. The court system, probably local law enforcement, maybe even the prosecutor's office. I know, Emily said simply. That's why Maria's network exists, because the system doesn't work for people like us. Daniel looked at the brass key lying on Sarah's desk, then at Emily's exhausted face, then at the recording device that contained evidence of corruption at the highest levels of his community. For the first time in his 15-year career, he had absolutely no idea what he was supposed to do next. Daniel stared at the recording device for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. Every instinct he'd developed as a police officer told him to follow protocol, secure the evidence, contact his superiors, work within the system he'd sworn to uphold. But everything Emily had told him suggested that the system itself might be compromised. I need to hear that recording, he said finally. Emily nodded and pressed play. The sound quality was poor, clearly captured from a distance, but Judge Whitmore's distinctive voice was unmistakable. Daniel had heard it countless times at community events, in courtrooms, at his sister's wedding. Told you that the Pine Ridge location was exposed. Santos is no longer a problem, but the pregnant one got away. There was a pause, then another voice, male and unfamiliar. She's 8 months along. She can't have gone far. My people are tracking her through the forest preserve. Your people need to understand the sensitivity of this situation, Judge. Whitmore's voice continued. If she reaches Grey Hollow, if she makes contact with local law enforcement, we have a serious problem. The testimony hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday. Without her, the prosecution has nothing. What about the evidence? The documents Santos was keeping? That's being handled separately. But the witness is the key. Without her testimony, everything else becomes hearsay. The recording cut off abruptly, leaving the clinic examination room in heavy silence. Daniel felt as if he'd just heard his entire worldview crumble into pieces. When was this recorded? He asked. 3 days ago, Emily replied. The morning before I had to run. Sarah, who had been quietly monitoring Emily's condition while listening to the recording, looked up with concern. Emily, your blood pressure is elevated, and the contractions are getting stronger. The stress you're under isn't good for you, or the baby. I know, Emily said wearily, but what choice do I have? If I don't testify on Tuesday, Bradley Whitmore walks free, and he keeps doing this to other women. If I do testify, they kill me, and probably my daughter too. Daniel found himself thinking about his own history with the Whitmore family. Judge Whitmore had been the one to recommend him for promotion to senior patrol officer 5 years ago. The family had donated the new radio system that the police department had installed just last year. Bradley Whitmore occasionally volunteered at community events, always seeming like a devoted son who was following in his father's footsteps. How many other people in Grey Hollow had been fooled by the same facade of respectability? The adoption. Papers you mentioned, Daniel said. Do you still have them? Emily reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, slightly water-damaged but still intact. Inside were legal documents showing arrangements for a closed adoption through a Canadian Family Services agency. The adoptive parents were listed as James and Margaret Chen, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chen, a couple in Vancouver who had been trying to have children for 8 years. They don't know anything about the circumstances, Emily explained. Maria told them I was a young woman who wasn't ready to be a mother, which is true in a way. Sarah finished checking Emily's vital signs and pulled Daniel aside. We need to make some decisions quickly, she said quietly. Emily is showing signs of early labor, the stress, the physical exertion, the dehydration. It's all taking a toll. This baby could be born within the next few days. What does that mean for her safety? It means she needs to be somewhere secure and comfortable, with access to proper medical care. But it also means she's going to be increasingly immobile as labor progresses. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Emily had asked for his help, but he was beginning to understand that helping her meant going against everything he'd been trained to do as a police officer. It meant hiding evidence, obstructing an ongoing investigation, and potentially putting his own career and safety at risk. But it also meant protecting a pregnant woman and her unborn child from people who were willing to commit murder to keep their crimes hidden. "There's something I need to tell you both," he said, returning to Emily's bedside. "Something about my own history with the Whitmore family." Emily looked up at him with tired eyes. "What kind of history?" Judge Whitmore helped. "My career. When I came back from military service, when I was looking for work in law enforcement, he wrote letters of recommendation. He vouched for my character when I applied to the police academy. He's been a mentor to me for 15 years. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Daniel saw Emily's expression close off slightly, the wariness returning to her eyes. "I'm not telling you this to make you doubt my intentions," Daniel continued quickly. "I'm telling you because you need to understand that if I help you, if I go against the Whitmore family, I'm not just risking my job. I'm destroying relationships that go back decades. And," Emily's voice was neutral, but Daniel could hear, "the challenge underneath. And I'm going to do it anyway," Daniel said firmly, "because 15 years of good recommendations don't erase what was done to you, and they don't justify covering up crimes." Sarah nodded approvingly. "So what's our next step?" Daniel had been thinking about that since he first heard the recording of Judge Whitmore's phone conversation. "We need to get Emily somewhere safe, where she can give birth without being found. We need to secure the evidence in that safety deposit box, and we need to find a way to get that evidence to someone in the prosecutor's office who isn't compromised." "The cabin," Emily said suddenly. "Maria mentioned a backup safehouse, something about a cabin in the mountains north of Grey Hollow. She said it was completely off the grid, that it had been used before when the regular safehouses were compromised." Daniel knew the area she was talking about. Thousands of acres of national forest land, scattered with hunting cabins and summer retreats that were occupied only seasonally. Many of them had no phone service, no internet, no connection to the outside world, except for forest service roads that were often impassable in bad weather. "Do you know how to find it?" "Maria gave me GPS coordinates," Emily said, pulling a small piece of paper from her shoe alongside where the key had been hidden. "But I don't know if it's stocked with supplies or if there's anyone there to help." Daniel looked at the coordinates and recognized the general area. It was about 20 miles into the forest preserve, accessible only by logging roads that would require a 4-wheel drive vehicle. "I know that area," he said. "My father and I used to hunt up there when I was a kid. If there's a cabin at those coordinates, I can find it." "Daniel," Sarah said quietly, "if you take Emily up there, if you help her hide from an active investigation, you're crossing a line you can't uncross." He nodded, understanding the full implications of what he was about to do. "I know, but I've spent 15 years taking an oath to protect and serve, and right now, protecting Emily is what that oath requires." Emily looked at him with something that might have been hope for the first time since he'd found her under the oak tree. "When do we leave?" she asked. Daniel's cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, about 15 miles north of Grey Hollow and 5 miles from the nearest neighbor. He'd inherited the property from his grandfather, who'd built the modest structure as a hunting retreat in the 1960s. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living area with a stone fireplace, but it had electricity from a small generator, a well for water, and most importantly, it was completely off any official records. The drive up had taken 45 minutes on winding forest roads, with Emily sleeping fitfully in the passenger seat despite the jarring ride. Daniel had called in sick to the department, telling his supervisor he was coming down with the flu and wouldn't be in for a few days. It wasn't entirely a lie. He felt sick to his stomach about what he was doing, even as he knew it was the right thing to do. Now, as Emily settled into the cabin's main bedroom, Daniel found himself checking and rechecking the trail camera he'd repositioned to monitor the access road. The small device, originally intended to photograph deer and elk, now served as an early warning system for any unwanted visitors. "How are you feeling?" he asked Emily as she emerged from the bedroom wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her torn clothes. "Tired, scared, but safer than I've felt in days," she admitted, settling carefully onto the couch near the fireplace. "Thank you for this, Daniel. I know what it's costing you." Daniel poured coffee from the pot he'd started on the wood-burning stove and handed her a mug. "Tell me more about Maria's network. How did it work?" Emily wrapped her hands around the warm mug, seeming to draw comfort from the heat. It was incredibly sophisticated. Maria had safe houses across 3 states, all funded through private donors who knew what we were dealing with. Women would be moved every few months, sometimes more often if there were security concerns. How many people were involved? I never knew exact numbers. Operational security, Maria called it. But from what I could piece together, there were doctors who would treat us without insurance paperwork, lawyers who would handle legal documents under assumed names, social workers who would create new identities. Emily paused, sipping her coffee. It was like a whole parallel system designed to help women who couldn't get help through official channels. Daniel thought about the implications. That's a massive operation, the kind of thing that would require serious funding and coordination. Maria never talked about money, but I got the impression the network was well funded. We never wanted for anything. Food, medical care, basic necessities were always provided. "Did you ever meet other women in the network?" Emily nodded, a sad smile crossing her face. 17 different women over 3 years, all with similar stories, all hiding from men whose families had enough power to make charges disappear. Her expression darkened. What struck me was how many of them involved the same families, the same circles of power. The same families? Not just the Whitmores. Maria showed me files on at least 6 different prominent families across Oregon and Washington. Senators' sons, judges' children, CEOs whose companies donated heavily to political campaigns. There was a pattern. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. A coordinated pattern. I don't know if it was coordinated, or just how power protects itself, but Maria had been documenting it for years. Names, dates, connections between families, evidence of cover-ups that went all the way to the state level. The sound of Emily's phone, Maria's phone, suddenly chirping, made them both freeze. Daniel reached for his service weapon before remembering. The phone had been dead for 2 days. Emily stared at the device in confusion. "That's impossible. The battery died yesterday." She picked up the phone, and Daniel saw that it was indeed powered on, showing a single text message from an unknown number. "Are you safe?" "Don't respond," Daniel said immediately. "That could be anyone. But what if it's Maria? What if she's alive and trying to contact me?" Daniel moved to the window, checking the view of the access road. "Think about it, Emily. That phone was supposedly secure, but somehow the people looking for you knew exactly where to find the Pine Ridge safe house. What if the phone was compromised from the beginning?" The possibility seemed to hit Emily like a physical blow. She stared down at the device with growing horror. "You think they've been tracking me this whole time? I think we have to assume the worst." Daniel took the phone from her hands and carefully removed the battery. "If that phone has GPS capability, if it's been sending location data, then bringing it here was a mistake." Emily's face went pale. "Oh, God. If they know about this place." "They don't. Not yet." Daniel moved to the kitchen and retrieved a small toolkit, "but we need to assume they might figure it out eventually." He spent the next few minutes disassembling the phone completely, separating the battery, the SIM card, and the main circuit board. Each component went into a separate metal container, improvised Faraday cages that would block any electronic signals. "Tell me about the other safe houses," Daniel said as he worked. "Were there security protocols?" Maria was obsessive about security. New phones every month, never the same route twice when moving between houses, code words for different types of danger. Emily paused, But now I'm wondering if all of that security was just for show. Daniel looked up from the disassembled phone. What do you mean? What if the network wasn't really protecting us? What if it was designed to keep us contained, to keep us under observation until we could be dealt with permanently? The thought had occurred to Daniel as well, but hearing Emily voice it made the possibility more real and more terrifying. "The recording you played for me," he said. "Judge Whitmore said that Maria was no longer a problem. That sounds like she's dead." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "Like the woman who spent 3 years protecting me is dead because she tried to help me escape." Daniel moved to sit beside Emily on the couch, close enough to offer comfort, but careful not to crowd her. "We don't know that for certain, don't we?" Emily looked at him with eyes that seemed much older than her 28 years. "Think about it, Daniel. I was supposed to testify on Tuesday. Today is Thursday. If Maria's network was legitimate, if it was really designed to protect women like me, wouldn't there be backup protocols? Wouldn't someone have contacted me by now to make sure I was safe?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Daniel found himself thinking about the elaborate nature of what Emily had described. Safe houses, new identities, private medical care, legal documentation. The kind of operation that would require not just money, but connections throughout law enforcement and government agencies. "Emily," he said quietly, "I need you to consider the possibility that you were never supposed to make it to that testimony." Hearing, she nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I know. I think I've known since yesterday morning when those men showed up at Pine Ridge. This was never about protecting me. This was about making sure I disappeared before I could." Tell the truth. Daniel spent the next morning researching everything he could find about the Whitmore family, using his laptop's satellite internet connection to dig through public records, newspaper archives, and court documents. What he found painted a picture that made his stomach turn. Over the past 15 years, there had been at least 8 civil settlements involving Bradley Whitmore and allegations of assault or harassment. All had been sealed by court order. All had involved young women who had subsequently left the state. All had been handled by the same law firm, Whitmore, Patterson and Associates, the family practice run by Bradley's uncle. "It's a pattern," Daniel said, showing Emily the printed documents spread across the cabin's small kitchen table. "Look at this. Every 2 or 3 years, a settlement. Different women, but always the same circumstances, always sealed records, always followed by the victim relocating." Emily studied the papers, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She'd been having mild contractions throughout the morning, regular enough to be concerning, but not yet strong enough to indicate active labor. "These women," she said, pointing to the settlement records, "I wonder how many of them ended up in Maria's network." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. If you're a victim of assault by someone with this much power, if you try to go through official channels and end up with a settlement that legally prevents you from talking about what happened to you, where do you go from there?" Daniel saw where she was heading. "You go underground. You find people who help women disappear. And once you're in that system, once you're dependent on Maria's network for your safety and survival, you're completely under their control." Emily's voice grew harder. "They know where you are at all times. They control your communication with the outside world. They manage your medical care, your legal documents, your entire identity." The implications were staggering. Daniel found himself staring at a framed campaign photograph on his own cabin wall. Judge Whitmore at a charity fundraiser, smiling and shaking hands with local business leaders. The image had been hanging there for so long, Daniel had stopped seeing it, but now it felt like an accusation. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "Based on what Maria showed me, at least 20 years, maybe longer." Emily shifted uncomfortably on the couch, wincing as another contraction tightened across her abdomen. She had files going back to the 1990s. Different victims, but the same family, the same methods of intimidation and cover-up. Daniel removed the photograph from the wall and turned it face down. "I need to call Dr. Chen." Those contractions are getting stronger. No, Emily said quickly. If Sarah comes here, if there's any record of her visiting this location, it could compromise her safety too. How many people are we going to put at risk? Emily, you're about to have a baby. Medical complications during childbirth can be life-threatening. I know, but so can being found by the people who killed Maria. Emily struggled to her feet, one hand pressed against her lower back. Besides, women have been giving birth without hospitals for thousands of years. Daniel understood her logic, but it didn't make him feel any better about the situation. Emily was 8 months pregnant, under tremendous stress, and showing signs of early labor. Even under the best circumstances, childbirth could be unpredictable and dangerous. His satellite phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed Dr. Chen's number. "Answer it," Emily said, "but be careful what you say." "Sarah," Daniel answered cautiously. "Daniel, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. There's something you need to know." "What is it?" "There was a fire at the Pine Ridge location last night. The entire property burned to the ground. The fire department is calling it suspicious. Accelerant was used." Daniel felt his blood run cold. "Any casualties?" "One body was found in the ruins, female, unidentified. The coroner's office is treating it as a homicide." Emily had moved close enough to hear Sarah's voice through the phone. Her face went pale, and she sank back onto the couch. "Sarah, I can't talk long. Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm at the clinic, but Daniel, there's more. I had a visit from 2 men this morning. They showed me badges, FBI they claimed, asking about a pregnant woman who might have come in for medical treatment. They had Emily's photo. What did you?" "Tell them?" "Nothing. I told them patient confidentiality prevented me from discussing anyone's medical care without a warrant. But they were very insistent, and they knew details they shouldn't have known." Daniel exchanged glances with Emily. If federal agents were involved, the scope of the conspiracy was even larger than they'd imagined. "Sarah, I need you to be very careful. Don't trust anyone who claims to be investigating this case." "I understand. Daniel, where are you? Are you both safe?" "For now. But we may need your help soon. Whatever you need." Daniel ended the call and turned to Emily, who was staring at the floor with tears in her eyes. "Maria's really dead," she whispered. "We don't know that for certain. The body could be anyone." "No." Emily looked up at him with absolute certainty. "It's her. They killed her because she tried to help me escape, and then they burned down the safe house to destroy any evidence of the network." Daniel knelt beside the couch, close enough to offer comfort. "Emily, I'm sorry. She saved my life." Emily continued, her voice growing stronger. "For 3 years she kept me safe when no one else would. She believed me when I said I wanted to testify, even though she knew it would put the entire network at risk." A stronger contraction gripped Emily, causing her to gasp and double over. When it passed, she looked at Daniel with fierce determination. "I'm going to testify on Tuesday," she said. "Even if I have to crawl into that courthouse, even if they kill me 5 minutes after I'm done talking, I'm going to tell the world what Bradley Whitmore did to me and to all those other women." "Emily, no. Maria died protecting the truth. The least I can do is make sure that truth gets told." Daniel understood her resolve, but he also understood the practical realities of their situation. Emily was in early labor, hiding in a remote cabin, with federal agents and private contractors searching for her. Getting her safely to Portland for a Tuesday testimony hearing would require resources and help from people they could trust. "Okay," he said finally, "we'll figure out how to get you there. But first, we need to secure that evidence from the safety deposit box." Emily nodded. "The bank is in Gray Hollow, Main Street, 3 blocks from the police station." "I know it. I've been banking there for 15 years. Can you get to it without being seen?" Daniel thought about the logistics. First National Bank was right in the heart of downtown Gray Hollow. On a normal day, he could walk in and out without attracting attention. But if there were federal agents in town asking questions, if his own department had been alerted to look for Emily, then showing up at the bank might trigger surveillance he couldn't detect. "I'll have to be careful," he said. "But yes, I can. Get to it." Emily reached into her shoe and handed him the brass key they'd discussed at Dr. Chen's clinic. "Box 247. Everything you need should be in there." Daniel pocketed the key, understanding that he was now in possession of evidence that could destroy some of the most powerful people in his community, and that might be the only thing standing between Emily and the people who wanted her dead. "While I'm gone," he said, "I want you to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and don't answer the phone or the door for anyone. What if something happens? What if the baby comes while you're gone?" Daniel pulled out his personal cell phone and programmed in Dr. Chen's number. "Call Sarah if you need medical help, but only if it's an absolute emergency." Emily nodded, though Daniel could see the fear in her eyes. They both understood that they were running out of time and options. The testimony hearing was 5 days away. Emily was in early labor, and federal agents were actively hunting for them. As Daniel prepared to leave the cabin, he realized that everything that happened next would determine not just Emily's fate, but the fate of every woman who had been victimized by the Whitmore family's crimes. The brass key felt heavy in his pocket as he walked to his truck. Daniel's hands shook as he inserted the brass key into safety deposit box 247. The bank manager, Mrs. Peterson, had recognized him and made small talk about his family while processing the paperwork, completely unaware that he was about to access evidence that could topple the most powerful family in Grey Hollow. The box was larger than he'd expected, filled with manila folders, photographs, and what appeared to be several audio recording devices. Daniel quickly transferred everything into a canvas bag he'd brought, his heart racing as he realized the scope of what Maria had collected over the years. But it was the folder labeled Network Operations, Confidential, that made his blood run cold. Back in his truck, parked behind the bank in an alley where he hoped to avoid surveillance, Daniel opened the folder and began reading documents that turned everything he thought he understood about Emily's situation upside down. The letterhead at the top of the first document read, Whitmore Family Foundation, Charitable Operations Division. Below that, a memo dated 3 months ago, Underground Network Funding, Fiscal Year 2023. The board has approved continued funding for the Santos operation at $2, $4 million annually. This funding covers safehouse operations, medical care, legal documentation, and operational security for approximately 35-40 clients per year. As discussed in previous meetings, this operation serves dual purposes, providing legitimate assistance to victims while ensuring complete oversight and control of potential witnesses. Daniel read the memo 3 times before the full implications sank in. The Whitmore family had been funding Maria's network. They weren't just covering up their son's crimes, they were actively managing the victims through an elaborate system that masqueraded as protection while actually providing surveillance and control. He flipped through more documents, each one more damning than the last. Bank records showing regular transfers from Whitmore Foundation accounts to shell companies that funded the safe houses. Communication logs between Maria and someone identified only as WF1, discussing the movement and management of assets, which Daniel realized were the women being hidden in the network. And then, at the bottom of the stack, a document that made his hands tremble with rage. Asset Management Protocol, Client 47, E. Baird. Client has expressed intention to proceed with testimony despite multiple intervention attempts. Recommend immediate implementation of final protocol. Assets pregnancy provides opportunity for permanent resolution while maintaining plausible deniability. Suggest timing coincident with delivery to maximize emotional impact and minimize investigative complications. The document was signed with the initials R.W. Robert Whitmore. Daniel sat in his truck for several minutes, trying to process what he'd just learned. The network that Emily had trusted with her life for 3 years hadn't been protecting her. It had been a sophisticated trap designed to monitor and eventually eliminate witnesses to Bradley Whitmore's crimes. Maria Santos, The woman Emily had trusted completely had been working for the Whitmore family the entire time. The final protocol was clear. They intended to kill Emily during childbirth, making it appear as a tragic medical complication. No investigation, no awkward questions, just another unfortunate statistic of maternal mortality. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Officer Martinez, we need to talk. Coffee shop on Main Street, 1 hour. Come alone." A friend. Every instinct told Daniel the message was a trap, but the documents in the bag beside him suggested that Emily was in immediate danger and that the people hunting her had resources and reach far beyond what he'd imagined. He needed information, and whoever had sent the text clearly knew who he was and what he was doing. The coffee shop on Main Street was nearly empty at 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. Daniel chose a table near the back, where he could watch the entrance, the canvas bag of evidence at his feet. He'd been waiting for 10 minutes when a woman, in her 50s, approached his table, someone he didn't recognize, with graying hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Officer Martinez," she said, sitting down across from him without invitation. "Thank you for coming. Who are you?" "Dr. Rebecca Martinez, no relation, as I told Emily 3 years ago when she first came to see me." The woman smiled grimly. "I'm the therapist who made the phone call that got Emily into Maria's network." Daniel felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. "You're part of this." "I was. Until 3 days ago when I realized what we'd actually been doing. Doctor, Martinez pulled out a small recording device and placed it on the table between them. "I need you to hear something." She pressed play. Maria Santos's voice filled the space between them, speaking to someone on the phone in Spanish. Daniel's high. School Spanish was rusty, but he could make out enough to understand that Maria was reporting on Emily's condition and discussing timeline for something called the final intervention. "This was recorded 2 days before Emily had to run," Dr. Martinez explained. "Maria was reporting directly to Judge Whitmore about Emily's pregnancy, her mental state, and her continued intention to testify. You were monitoring your own patients?" "Not monitoring. Managing." Dr. Martinez's voice was heavy with self-disgust. "For 5 years, I thought I was part of a legitimate network helping traumatized women. I referred dozens of women to Maria's safe houses, thinking I was saving their lives. But you weren't." "No. We were delivering them into a system designed to control them completely and eliminate them when they became inconvenient." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "Do you understand what this means, Officer Martinez? Every woman I referred to Maria's network over the past 5 years, they're all gone. Relocated, we were told. New identities, fresh starts in other states. But really, I think they're dead. I think we've been accessories to multiple murders disguised as a charitable operation." Daniel thought about the documents in the bag at his feet. "How did you find out?" 3 days ago, I got a call from Maria. She was panicking, saying that someone at the Pine Ridge safe house had discovered files that proved the network was compromised. She said Emily had seen documents that revealed the Whitmore family connection. That's when Emily had to run. That's when Maria realized she'd been caught. But instead of helping Emily escape, instead of exposing the whole operation, Maria called Judge Whitmore to report what had happened. Dr. Martinez paused the recording and looked directly at Daniel. "Maria didn't die trying to protect Emily, Officer Martinez. She died because Judge Whitmore couldn't trust her to keep the secret anymore." The revelation hit Daniel like a physical blow. Emily had spent 3 years trusting Maria completely, believing she was being protected by people who cared about her safety and well-being. In reality, she'd been a prisoner in a system designed to manage her until she could be eliminated. "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel asked. "Because Emily is the first woman who managed to escape before they could implement their final protocol. She's the only witness who can expose what's really been happening." Dr. Martinez leaned back in her chair. "And because I need to try to make amends for what I've been part of." "What do you want from me?" I want you to help me get Emily to that testimony hearing on Tuesday. I want the world to know what the Whitmore family has been doing, and I want every woman who trusted us to be properly mourned." Daniel looked at the recording device on the table, then at the bag of evidence at his feet. Everything Emily had told him about her experience in the network took on a darker, more sinister meaning. The careful security protocols, the controlled communication, the managed medical care. It had all been designed to keep her isolated and dependent while her captors decided when and how to dispose of her. "There's something else," Dr. Martinez said quietly. "Something Emily doesn't know yet." "What?" "The baby she's carrying, the DNA evidence that proves Bradley Whitmore assaulted her, that's not the only evidence. Maria kept samples from multiple victims over the years. Blood work, DNA evidence, medical documentation of injuries consistent with sexual assault." Daniel felt a surge of hope. Evidence that could convict Bradley for multiple crimes? Evidence that could convict Bradley, Judge Whitmore, and everyone else involved in the cover-up conspiracy. Dr. Martinez picked up the recording device. "But only if we can get Emily to that courthouse alive." As Daniel left the coffee shop 20 minutes later, the canvas bag of evidence felt heavier than ever. Emily wasn't just carrying her own story of survival, she was carrying the stories of dozens of women who had been silenced forever by a system that pretended to protect them while it destroyed them. The drive back to the cabin took 45 minutes, during which Daniel tried to figure out how to tell Emily that everything she'd believed about her rescue had been a lie. Daniel found Emily pacing the cabin's small living room, one hand pressed against her lower back, the other clutching his father's service revolver, a restored 1970s police weapon that he kept in a locked cabinet for sentimental reasons. "I heard vehicles on the access road," she said without preamble. "About 20 minutes ago. They stopped just out of sight, then turned around and left." Daniel set the canvas bag of evidence on the kitchen table and moved to the window, checking the view through his repositioned trail camera's monitor. The screen showed an empty road, but fresh tire tracks were visible in the dirt. "They're scouting," he said grimly, "testing our defenses, seeing if anyone responds to their presence." Emily set the revolver on the coffee table with shaking hands. "I've been having contractions every 10 minutes for the past hour. Daniel, this baby is coming, whether we're ready or not." The timing couldn't have been worse. Daniel pulled out his satellite phone and dialed Dr. Chen's number, knowing that bringing her to the cabin would put her at risk, but understanding that Emily needed medical care he couldn't provide. "Sarah, I need your help. Emily's inactive. Labor. How far apart are the contractions? 10 minutes, but they're getting stronger. That means you have several hours, maybe longer, for a first birth. Can you get her to the hospital?" Daniel looked out the window again, noting how exposed the cabin was despite its remote location. Anyone approaching would be visible for at least a quarter mile, but that also meant they would be visible to anyone watching from the tree line. "It's not safe to move her. Can you come here?" There was a pause before Sarah responded. "Daniel, I had another visit from those federal agents this afternoon. They're watching the clinic. If I leave now, they'll follow me. What do you need me to do?" "You need to be prepared to deliver this baby yourself if necessary. I'll walk you through everything, but you need supplies." Daniel grabbed a notebook. "And pen. Tell me what I need. Clean towels, lots of them. Scissors or a sharp knife that you can sterilize. String or shoelaces for the umbilical cord. Iodine or rubbing alcohol. Plastic sheeting to protect the bed. And you need to be prepared for complications." "What kind of complications?" "Breech presentation, umbilical cord problems, excessive bleeding. Emily's been under tremendous stress, which increases the risk of difficulties during delivery." Daniel wrote frantically, understanding that he was about to become responsible for safely delivering a baby under conditions that would challenge even experienced medical professionals. "Sarah, there's something else. I found evidence that the entire network was compromised. Maria Santos was working for the Whitmore family. The safe houses, the protection, all of it was designed to control and eventually eliminate victims." Silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. "That's impossible," Sarah said finally. "I've treated network clients for years. Maria was dedicated to protecting these women. I have documents proving otherwise, financial records, communication logs, everything. The Whitmore Family Foundation has been funding the entire operation." "My God." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "How many women? We don't know, but Emily may be the only survivor." Another contraction gripped Emily, stronger than the previous ones. She doubled over, gripping the back of the couch, breathing hard until it passed. 8 minutes, she gasped. "They're getting closer together." Daniel's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Deputy Susan Torres, his most trusted colleague in the department. He answered cautiously. "Daniel, where are you? Captain's been looking for you all day, and there are federal agents asking questions." "About your whereabouts?" "What kind of questions?" "They're claiming you're involved in harboring a fugitive. They have surveillance photos of you leaving Dr. Chen's clinic with a pregnant woman Tuesday night." Daniel felt ice in his veins. If they had surveillance photos, then they'd been watching him from the very beginning. "Susan, I need you to listen carefully. The federal agents aren't legitimate. They're working for people who want to silence." "A witness in a sexual assault case?" "Daniel, that sounds paranoid, I know, but I have evidence. Documents proving a conspiracy that reaches all the way to Judge Whitmore's family." There was a long pause. "Susan Torres had been his partner for 5 years before her promotion to detective. If anyone in the department could be trusted, it was her." "What do you need?" she asked finally. "I need you to contact the state prosecutor's office directly. As for Assistant DA Jennifer Walsh, she's supposed to be handling Emily Baird's testimony hearing on Tuesday. Tell her that Emily's alive, that she has evidence of a conspiracy, and that federal agents claiming to investigate her case are actually trying to silence her." "Emily Baird, that's the pregnant woman you're with?" "Yes. And Susan, she's in labor. We're at—" Daniel hesitated, realizing that even Susan's phone might be monitored. "Don't tell me over the phone," Susan said, quickly. "But Daniel, if those federal agents are legitimate, if you really are harboring a fugitive, this could destroy your career." "I know. But if they're not legitimate, if Emily dies because I followed protocol instead of my conscience, I'll never be able to live with myself." Emily cried out as another contraction hit, this one lasting nearly a minute. When it passed, she looked at Daniel with exhaustion and determination mixed in equal measure. "How long until help arrives?" she asked. "Help isn't coming," Daniel said, gently. "We're on our own." Emily nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. "Then we'd better get ready." Daniel spent the next hour preparing the cabin's bedroom for an emergency delivery, boiling water, sterilizing scissors, and gathering every clean towel and sheet he could find. Emily moved restlessly between the bedroom and living room, unable to find a comfortable position, as the contractions intensified. At 6 o'clock, as darkness began to fall over the mountains, the trail camera's motion sensor triggered an alert. Daniel checked the monitor and saw 3 black SUVs approaching slowly up the access road, their headlights off, but clearly visible in the camera's infrared display. "They're here," he said, moving to the gun cabinet where he kept his personal firearms alongside his father's old revolver. Emily, who had been timing contractions with a stopwatch, looked up with fear and fury mixed in her expression. 5 minutes. "Apart now. This baby is coming tonight, whether we're ready or not." Daniel loaded his service weapon and checked the spare magazines, understanding that he was about to face a situation unlike anything in his 15 years of police work. He wasn't just protecting a witness, he was protecting a woman in labor who was about to give birth to evidence that could convict some of the most powerful people in the state. "Emily, I need you to get into the back bedroom and stay low. Lock the door and don't come out no matter what you hear." "What about the baby?" "If labor progresses too quickly, if you can't wait for this to be over, there are medical supplies in the closet and instructions I wrote down from Dr. Chen. You're strong enough to do this if you have to." Emily struggled to her feet, pausing. as another contraction gripped her. When it passed, she looked at Daniel with an expression that reminded him why she'd survived 3 years in hiding and a desperate flight through the forest. "Daniel," she said quietly, "that safety deposit box, did it contain what we hoped?" "More than we hoped. Enough to convict Bradley Whitmore for multiple assaults and to prove his father's involvement in the cover-up conspiracy." "Then whatever happens tonight, make sure that evidence reaches the prosecutor's office." Daniel nodded, understanding that Emily was giving him permission to prioritize the evidence over her safety, if it came to that choice. The SUVs had stopped about 100 yards from the cabin, just beyond the effective range of most handguns, but close enough for the occupants to surround the property on foot. Daniel could see figures moving between the vehicles, at least 8 men in tactical gear. His satellite phone rang. "Unknown number." "Officer Martinez," a voice said when he answered. "This is Agent Crawford, FBI. You're harboring a federal fugitive, and you're interfering with an ongoing investigation. Send Emily Baird out now, and you'll be treated with the consideration due a fellow law enforcement officer." "Show me your credentials," Daniel replied. "Drive up to the cabin and present proper identification." "That's not how this works. You have 5 minutes to comply, or we'll assume you're a hostile and respond accordingly." The line went dead. Daniel looked toward the bedroom door, behind which Emily was dealing with increasingly intense labor pains, then at the canvas bag containing evidence that could bring justice for dozens of victims. 5 minutes to decide between surrender and a firefight that would determine whether the truth about the Whitmore family's crimes ever saw the light of day. Daniel chambered around in his service weapon and prepared to make the most important decision of his life. Emily's scream cut through the cabin's silence like a knife. Daniel rushed to the bedroom door, finding her crouched beside the bed, water pooling beneath her feet. "My water broke," she gasped between contractions. "Daniel, the baby's coming now." Through the front window, Daniel could see the tactical team positioning themselves around the cabin's perimeter. They moved with professional precision, establishing fields of fire and blocking escape routes. These weren't federal agents. They were private contractors, the kind of people who cleaned up problems for families with enough money to make those problems disappear permanently. "Emily, I need you to listen to me," Daniel said, helping her onto the bed he'd prepared with clean sheets and towels. "Those men outside aren't here to arrest you. They're here to kill you and make it look like you died in childbirth." Another contraction gripped Emily, and she bore down instinctively, her body taking over the process whether her mind was ready or not. When it passed, she looked at Daniel with crystalline clarity. "Then we don't let them," she said simply. "Help me bring this baby into the world, Daniel. Help me give her a chance to live." The sound of breaking glass came from the living room. Someone had thrown something through the front window. Daniel moved to investigate, keeping low, and saw a canister rolling across the floor, releasing white smoke. Tear gas. They were trying to force him and Emily out of the cabin, probably planning to claim they'd been overcome by smoke inhalation during a tragic fire that would destroy all evidence of what had really happened. Daniel grabbed wet towels and sealed the bedroom door as best he could, then opened the bedroom's single window to create ventilation. The fresh mountain air helped, but he could still hear Emily coughing between contractions. "How far apart now?" he asked, checking his watch. 3 minutes, maybe less." Emily gripped his hand as another wave of pain washed over her. "I can feel the baby moving down. She's coming whether we're ready or not." Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message from Deputy Torres. "State prosecutor confirms Emily Baird testimony hearing scheduled Tuesday. Sending real FBI agents your location." "Hold on!" Hope surged in Daniel's chest, but he realized that help was at least an hour away, and Emily didn't have an hour. The tactical team outside wouldn't wait for real federal agents to arrive. They would move to eliminate their targets before their cover was blown. More breaking glass, this time from the kitchen window. Daniel could hear boots on the cabin's wooden porch, voices coordinating an assault from multiple directions. "Emily," he said, pulling on surgical gloves from the emergency medical kit. I need you to focus on breathing and pushing when your body tells you to. I'm going to deliver this baby, and then we're going to get out of here. How? Emily asked between gasps. Daniel pointed to the bedroom window. There's a trail that leads down to the creek bed. From there we can reach the Forest Service Road, where Susan will meet us. I can't run through the forest with a newborn baby. You won't have to run. You'll have to trust me. The bedroom door shuddered as someone tried to force it open from the living room. Daniel had barricaded it with a dresser, but the barrier wouldn't hold for long. I can see the baby's head, Daniel said, positioning himself to catch Emily's daughter as she entered the world. One more big push. Emily bore down with everything she had, her face red with effort and determination. The baby's head emerged, followed by her shoulders, and then suddenly Daniel was holding a tiny, perfect human being who opened her mouth and screamed her protest at being born into such circumstances. She's beautiful, Daniel said, wrapping the baby in a clean towel and placing her on Emily's chest. She's absolutely perfect. Emily's tears were flowing freely as she held her daughter for the first time. Hello, Hope, she whispered. Hello, my brave little girl. The bedroom door splintered as the tactical team finally broke through Daniel's barricade. He had perhaps 30 seconds before armed men would flood into the room where Emily lay with her newborn daughter. Daniel quickly cut and tied off the umbilical cord, then helped Emily to her feet. She was weak from childbirth, but moving under her own power, clutching baby Hope against her chest. The window, Daniel said, opening it fully and checking the drop to the ground below. It was about 8 feet. Manageable for him, more difficult. For Emily in her condition, I can't jump with the baby. You don't have to. Daniel took off his jacket and fashioned it into a sling. Put Hope in here, secure against your chest. I'll go first and catch you. The sound of boots in the living room was getting closer. Emily nodded and settled baby Hope into the makeshift carrier, wrapping her tightly against the cold mountain air. Daniel climbed through the window and dropped to the ground, then reached up to help Emily down. As her feet touched the earth, the bedroom door burst open and men with weapons poured into the room they'd just vacated. This way, Daniel whispered, leading Emily toward the tree line, where darkness would provide cover for their escape. Behind them, angry voices shouted orders, and flashlight beams began sweeping the area around the cabin. The forest was pitch black and treacherous, full of fallen logs and hidden rocks that could turn an ankle or send someone tumbling down the steep slope toward the creek. Emily moved with surprising strength for a woman who had given birth 20 minutes earlier, but Daniel could see her struggling to maintain her footing while protecting baby Hope. How much further? Emily whispered. 1/4 mile to the creek, then another 1/4 mile to the service road where Susan should be waiting. Behind them, the tactical team had discovered their escape route and was following with flashlights and night vision equipment. The beams of light swept back and forth through the trees, getting closer with each passing minute. Baby Hope chose that moment to cry, her newborn voice carrying through the quiet forest like a beacon for their pursuers. Emily tried to comfort her daughter while continuing to move, but the infant's distress was understandable. She'd been born into chaos and was now being carried through a dark, cold forest by people she didn't know. There, Daniel said, pointing toward a break in the trees ahead, the creek bed. They half slid, half fell down the steep embankment to the rocky stream below. The water was shallow but ice-cold, soaking through their shoes and making every step treacherous. Emily stumbled and nearly fell, but Daniel caught her arm and helped her maintain her balance. I can hear them, Emily said, looking back toward the slope they'd just descended. Daniel could hear them too. At least 4 men, crashing through the underbrush, no longer trying to move quietly now that they'd found the trail. Keep moving, he said. Susan will have backup with her. We just need to reach the road. They followed the creek bed for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes, Emily's strength fading with each step. Baby Hope had quieted. either exhausted or simply accepting of her circumstances. But Emily was beginning to show signs of postpartum complications. "I'm bleeding," she said quietly, "more than I should be." Daniel saw dark stains spreading across her clothes. Postpartum hemorrhaging was one of the complications Dr. Chen had warned him about, potentially life-threatening if not treated quickly. "The road's just ahead," he said, though he was beginning to doubt whether Emily would make it that far. A gunshot echoed through the forest, the bullet splintering bark from a tree just above Daniel's head. The tactical team had reached the creek bed and had them in sight. "Go!" Emily said, pressing baby Hope into Daniel's arms. "Take her and run. Get the evidence to the prosecutor. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Hope is the only proof that Bradley Whitmore assaulted me. Without her DNA, without the evidence in that bag, he walks free and keeps hurting women." Another gunshot, this one closer. Daniel could see the flashlight beams reflecting off the water behind them. "Emily, I can carry you both." "No, you can't. I'm bleeding out, Daniel. I might not make it anyway." Emily gripped his arm with surprising strength. "But she can make it. She can grow up knowing that her mother didn't die for nothing." The sound of vehicles approaching from ahead made them both freeze. Either Susan had arrived with backup, or more tactical team members were blocking their escape route. Blue and red emergency lights began flashing through the trees, and Daniel heard the blessed sound of sirens in the distance. "Federal agents," a voice called from the road ahead. "Emily Baird, Officer Martinez, identify yourselves." "Here," Daniel called back. "We're in the creek bed. Officer needs medical assistance." The real FBI agents reached them within minutes, followed by paramedics who immediately began treating Emily for postpartum hemorrhaging, while state police officers secured the area and arrested the tactical team members who had been pursuing them. As Emily was loaded into an ambulance baby, Hope in her arms and an IV line running into her elbow, she looked at Daniel with exhaustion and gratitude. "The evidence," she said weakly. "Safe," Daniel replied, holding up the canvas bag he'd managed to carry through their escape. "Assistant DA Walsh is already on her way here. You'll get your day in court, Emily." "And Hope?" Daniel looked at the tiny infant, now sleeping peacefully, despite everything she'd experienced in her first hour of life. "Hope is going to grow up in a world where Bradley Whitmore can't hurt anyone else." 3 hours later, as dawn broke over the mountains, Daniel sat in the hospital waiting room while doctors worked to stabilize Emily's condition. The canvas bag of evidence sat beside him, its contents already photographed and catalogued by state. Investigators who were building cases not just against Bradley Whitmore, but against everyone who had participated in the conspiracy to silence his victims. Deputy Torres appeared in the waiting room doorway, looking exhausted but relieved. "How is she?" Susan asked. "She's going to be okay. The baby, too." Daniel stood up, feeling the weight of the past few days settling into his bones. "What about the tactical team?" "Arrested. Turns out they're private contractors hired through a shell company that traces back to Judge Whitmore's personal attorney." Daniel nodded, understanding that the evidence they'd collected was already beginning to unravel the conspiracy that had cost so many lives. In room 314 down the hall, Emily Baird held her daughter and smiled for the first time in years, knowing that the truth was finally going to be told. 6 months after Hope Martinez, as she was now officially named, entered the world in Daniel's mountain cabin, Emily walked into the Portland Federal Courthouse carrying a Polaroid photograph that had become her most treasured possession. The image showed her holding her daughter in the hospital 3 days after the dramatic rescue, with Daniel standing protectively beside them both. All three of them alive and safe, despite everything that had tried to destroy them. The photograph had been taken by Deputy Torres, who had become not just a colleague, but a friend to both Emily and Daniel, as they navigated the complex legal proceedings that followed that night in the mountains. Emily kept the picture in her purse, a reminder of how far they'd all come from those terrifying hours when Hope's very survival had been uncertain. Today was Bradley Whitmore's sentencing hearing. Over the past 6 months, the evidence from Maria's safety deposit box had led to convictions that dismantled an entire network of corruption. Bradley himself had been convicted on 12 counts of sexual assault spanning a 15-year period. His father, Judge Robert Whitmore, faced federal charges for conspiracy, witness tampering, and accessory to murder in connection with Maria Santos's death. Emily took her seat in the courtroom gallery, Daniel beside her, and Hope sleeping peacefully. In her arms, the baby had grown into a beautiful, healthy 6-month-old who seemed to have inherited her mother's resilience and her adoptive father's steady temperament. Because that's what Daniel had become, not through legal adoption, but through the kind of bond that forms when people save each other's lives and choose to build a future together. "How are you feeling?" Daniel asked quietly as they waited for the proceedings to begin. "Scared," Emily admitted, "relieved, angry, grateful." She looked down at Hope, who was gripping her finger with tiny but determined hands. "Mostly grateful." The past 6 months had brought more changes to Grey Hollow than the small mountain town had seen in decades. The corruption investigation had revealed that the Whitmore family's influence had extended throughout the county's legal and law enforcement systems. 3 judges had been forced to resign. The prosecutor's office had been restructured under federal oversight. Even the Grey Hollow Police Department had undergone reforms, though Daniel's role in exposing the conspiracy had actually enhanced rather than damaged his reputation within the community. Dr. Sarah Chen had emerged as a hero in the local press, praised for her courage in treating network victims and her willingness to risk her safety to help Emily and Daniel during the crisis. She'd used her newfound prominence to establish a legitimate victim advocacy program, funded by federal grants and staffed by people who had been vetted by law enforcement agencies. Most importantly, the investigation had identified 17 other women who had been victims of the false protection network over the past 5 years. 3 of them were found alive, hidden in remote locations where they'd been essentially imprisoned while their captors decided their fate. The other 14 were presumed dead, though only Maria Santos's body had been recovered. "The defendant will rise," Judge Patricia Morrison announced as Bradley Whitmore was led into the courtroom in shackles. Emily had seen him only once since that graduation party 5 years ago, in photographs during the trial proceedings. He looked older now, thinner, with the kind of pallor that came from months in federal custody, but his eyes still held the arrogance that had made him believe he could assault women with impunity simply because of his family's wealth and connections. "Bradley James Whitmore," Judge Morrison continued, "you have been convicted by a jury of your peers on 12 counts of sexual assault in the 1st degree. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say?" Bradley's attorney whispered something in his ear, but Bradley shook his head and stood to address the court. "I want to say that I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry to the women I hurt, and I'm sorry to my family for the shame I've brought them." Emily felt a surge of anger at the inadequacy of his words, but also something that might have been pity. Bradley Whitmore had spent his entire life believing that his family's power made him untouchable. Only now, facing decades in federal prison, was he beginning to understand the consequences of his actions. "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Morrison said, "your crimes represent not just individual acts of violence, but a systematic abuse of power that corrupted our entire legal system. The evidence presented during your trial shows a pattern of behavior that spans 15 years and victimized dozens of women." The judge paused, looking directly at Emily in the gallery before continuing. "However, this case also represents something else. The extraordinary courage of witnesses like Emily Baird, who risked everything to ensure that the truth was told. It represents the dedication of law enforcement officers like Daniel Martinez, who chose justice over personal loyalty, and it represents the resilience of survivors who refused to be silenced." Judge Morrison returned her attention to Bradley. "I hereby sentence you to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Emily closed her eyes as the sentence was announced, feeling a weight she'd carried for 5 years finally beginning to lift from her shoulders. It wouldn't bring back the women who had died in the false protection network, but it ensured that Bradley Whitmore would never hurt anyone else. As they left the courthouse an hour later, Emily stopped on the steps and looked back at the building where justice had finally been served. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked. "I'm thinking about Maria," Emily said. "About how she spent the last days of her life believing she was protecting me, even though she was trapped in the same system that was trying to destroy me. Do you think she knew?" At the end, Emily considered the question. "I think she suspected. I think that's why she gave me the real GPS coordinates for your cabin, instead of the fake safehouse coordinates they expected her to give me." They walked slowly toward Daniel's truck, Hope beginning to fuss as her afternoon nap came to an end. Emily found herself thinking about the future, about the house she and Daniel were buying together in Grey Hollow, about the work she'd begun with Dr. Chen's advocacy program, about the little girl in her arms who would grow up knowing that her mother had been brave enough to tell the truth when it mattered most. "Emily," Daniel said as they reached the truck, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." She looked at him with curiosity and slight concern. He knelt down on one knee right there in the courthouse parking lot, pulling a simple diamond ring from his pocket. "I know we've done everything backwards, the baby, the crisis, the testimony, everything. But I love you, and I love Hope, and I want us to be a real family." Emily looked at the ring, then at Daniel, then at the courthouse behind them where she'd just watched justice being served after 5 years of fighting for it. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." As Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, Hope began to babble and reach for the sparkly object, making all 3 of them laugh. They were a family born out of crisis, forged in courage, and strengthened by their shared commitment to protecting each other and telling the truth. It wasn't the life Emily had imagined for herself 5 years ago, but it was better. It was real, and it was theirs, and no one could take it away from them ever again.